Good morning, world history. Today we are looking at how did Spain and Portugal build colonies in the Americas. Yesterday we talked about the Spanish conquests, and so when they were going in, they were trying to get land, they were trying to get slaves, they were trying to achieve all these goals. But now, what did they actually do once they had the land? That's what we're going to talk about today. So, by the mid 1500s, Spain has claimed this vast empire, stretching from California to South America. In time, it divides these lands into 4 provinces, including New Spain, Peru, a couple others. So how do you govern them? Well, Spain wanted to maintain super strict control. They did not want to leave anything to chance. And so the king sets up these Council of the Indies to pass laws. Okay? So, ruling. The king has the Council of the Indies. And the Council of the Indies appoints viceroys or viceroys, depending on who you ask. And they are direct representatives of the king who rule in the king's name in each province. Lesser officials and audiencias or advisory councils also assist in the ruling of each empire. The Council of the Indies closely monitors these colonial officials to make sure that they don't take over too much authority, because the last thing we'd want is somebody usurping the king's power, right? Now, spreading Christianity. To Spain, the 2 most important things were to spread Christianity and gain land. The Catholic Church worked with the government to convert Native Americans to Christianity. Church leaders often served as royal officials, so there was no separation of church and state going on. And they helped to regulate the activities of Spanish settlers. As Spain's American empire expands, church authority expands with it. So you've got Franciscans, Jesuits, and other missionaries baptizing thousands of Native Americans, building mission churches, working to turn new converts into loyal subjects of the Catholic King of Spain. So Christianity was kind of a double-edged sword. They wanted the Native Americans to be Christian because they wanted to save them. They wanted to save their souls. They also wanted them to be loyal to Spain. And if you were Catholic, then you had to be loyal to Spain because Spain's king was Catholic. Where they could, Spanish missionaries forcibly imposed European culture over Native American culture. So again, they wanted to establish the Spanish cultural superiority. They're trying to basically turn everybody as Spanish as they possibly can. Now, to control trade, they wanted to make the empire profitable, and so they're controlling economic activities, most particularly trade. The most valuable resources are going to be silver and gold, naturally. Colonists could export raw materials only to Spain, so you couldn't send them to any other nation, and could only buy Spanish manufactured goods. So you have these laws saying that if you live, even if France is going to give you more money, you can't sell to France, you can only sell to Spain. Even if you're going to be able to buy something cheaper from England, you can't buy from England, you can only buy from Spain. This keeps the Spanish economy profitable. When sugar was introduced in the West Indies and elsewhere, sugar cane was also quickly becoming a very profitable resource. The cane was refined into sugar, molasses, and rum. However, sugar cane had to be grown on plantations, which are these really large estates, and plantations needed large numbers of workers in order to even be profitable. Because if you're growing that much crop, you need to get it harvested. So they create this system, the encomienda system. And the encomienda system is a system of forced labor. It's the right to demand labor or tribute from Native Americans in a particular area. So here's how they made it work. They basically went to the Native Americans and said, we demand tribute. We demand payment because we're in charge of you. And the Native Americans usually didn't have anything to give as tribute or didn't have anything that the Europeans saw as valuable. And so the Europeans would say, oh, well, you don't have tribute? That means that you're in debt to us. Good news, to work off your debt to us will allow you to work on our plantations, essentially as slaves, but they're not slaves because technically they have a specific debt that they're paying back. See how that worked? Those who resisted were usually hunted down and killed. Diseases, starvation, and cruel treatment causes these drastic declines in Native American population. The encomienda system was also used in the mines. It wasn't just used on plantations. By the 1540s, you have silver from Peru and Bolivia filling Spanish ships, usually mined by Native Americans. And as thousands of Native Americans are dying, they're replaced by thousands more. So the colonists set up this encomienda system, basically saying, again, we demand tribute, payment, or labor. Oh, you can't pay, you can work. And that's how they got all their labor. A few bold priests, such as Bartolomé de las Casas, basically are condemning the evil of the system, okay? So a couple people recognize that this is really messed up. Thankfully, some Christians are realizing that this is really messed up, particularly Bartolomé de las Casas. And they're condemning the evils of the encomienda system. In these reports to Spain, Las Casas is detailing the horrors that the Spanish rule has brought to North Americans and basically pleading with the king to end the abuse. Prodded by Las Casas, Spain passes these new laws, the new laws of the Indies in 1542. These laws forbade enslavement and abuse of the Native Americans, but quite frankly, Spain was too far away to enforce them. Many Native Americans were forced to become peons. And your peons are workers forced to labor for a landlord in order to pay off the debt. Landlords would advance them food, tools, or seeds, creating debts that the workers could never pay off. So you would have these people who didn't have food, or they didn't have farming tools, or they didn't have seeds. And the farmers would say, okay, cool. I will give you these tools, but you have to work for me for 2 years to pay them back. At some point during that 2 years, you're going to need something else. And the farmer says, oh, I'll give you that in exchange for 2 more years of labor. So you're creating the system where the Native Americans can never get out of their obligations to pay off their debts. Again, really, really messed up. But those are peons. The peons were the ones that were forced to do all of those things. Now, bringing workers from Africa. As the Native Americans are dying in such great numbers and resisting, Las Casas says, you know what, I have a better idea. Let's get workers and laborers from Africa, because Las Casas believed that Africans were immune to the tropical diseases, which was not true. He also believed that Africans had skills in farming, mining, and metalworking. Now, Las Casas did come to terms and realize that he bitterly regretted his advice, because his advice actually perpetuated the African slave trade, which was really brutal and nasty, by perpetuating these lies that Africans couldn't contract these diseases, when of course they could. So the Spanish then begin bringing Africans to the Americas as slave laborers by the 1530s. As the demand for sugar products, remember, sugar has to be created on a plantation with a lot of workers. As the demand for sugar skyrockets, the settlers import millions of Africans as slaves. They were forced to work as field hands, miners, or servants in the home, and others became skilled artists and artisans. Within a few generations, Africans and their American-born descendants greatly outnumbered European settlers, because they were bringing so many Africans over. In cities, some enslaved Africans earned enough money to buy their freedom. Others resisted slavery by rebelling and running away. And so this is kind of the beginning of the slave trade in the Americas, which we will learn more about on Thursday, I believe. So colonial society and culture, what's it look like? What does this cultural blending look like? You've got Spanish, you've got Portuguese, you've got Africans, you've got Native Americans. And although the Spanish culture was dominant, you've got this blending of diverse traditions going on, and it's changing people's lives. Settlers learned Native American styles of building, which of course were superior to the settlers, because they actually used American goods, and they actually used American resources, whereas the Spanish styles of architecture were developed over in Europe and so weren't as useful in the Americas. At the same time, Europeans taught their religion to Native Americans. They also introduced animals like the horse. Horses were not in the North Americas or the South America until the Europeans brought them there. And now Africans are also contributing to the cultural mix, particularly the West Central Africans. When I say Africans, please don't think all Africans, because Egyptians are Africans, Moroccans are Africans, South Africans are Africans. Most of the slave trade is coming from West Central Africa. But they're contributing this cultural mix with their farming methods, cooking styles, crops, drama, dance, song, which is also now mixing into Christians. Any Africans that were converted to Christianity are blending their own cultures into that. In Cuba, Haiti, and elsewhere, Africans forged new religions that are kind of blending African and Christian beliefs. Now let's talk about the layers of society, right? So let's talk about who's on top, who's on the bottom, okay? So social class, which which is a key element of any society. The top, you've got your peninsulares. And your peninsulares are people that were born in Spain. Okay? Peninsular, specifically referring to the Iberian Peninsula on which Spain is located. Peninsulares filled the highest position in both colonial governments and the Catholic Church. So these are specifically people born in Spain. They're at the top. Your next down is your Creoles, which I know we have a specific meaning for Creoles now, but back then it meant an American-born descendant of a Spanish settler. It also could mean an American-born descendant of a French settler as well, but there weren't as many of them in this. So this is somebody who was born in the Americas of Spanish or French parents. So kind of first generation. Then your lower, so your Creoles are the ones who own most of the plantation, the ranches, and the mines. They're not necessarily running the governments, but they are doing pretty well for themselves. Lower social groups reflect more of the mixing of populations, specifically the mestizos and the mulattoes. The mestizos were people of Native American and European descent. So this is a mix of Native American and European. Then you have your mulattoes as well, which turned into a very not nice term, but it was the technical term for a while. And those are descendants of African and European descent. And those are the lowest social classes. These two most represent the mixing of cultures, but they were also the lower social classes. Now, towns and cities. The towns and cities, especially Mexico City, are just growing and booming. Colonial cities were the centers of government, commerce, European culture. Around the you usually had a central plaza with government buildings, Spanish-style churches. And cities are also centers of intellectual and cultural life, architecture, painting, poetry. All of those are in the cities. They also emphasized education. To meet the church's need for educated priests, the colonies began to build universities. The University of Mexico was established in 1551, which was actually long before Harvard in 1636, which is recognized as the oldest college in the U.S. Women wishing an education might enter a convent. One such woman was, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher this Spanish name, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Okay, and she was refused admission to the University of Mexico because she was female, but she entered a convent at age 18, devoted herself to the study and writing of poetry, and earned a reputation as one of the greatest poets ever to write in the Spanish language. So that was, unfortunately, really the only option for women. The Spanish, however, weren't the only ones in South America. So let's talk briefly about the Portuguese and Brazil. I know what some of you have been waiting for all your Brazilian pride. So a large area of South America remained outside the control of the British Empire, according to the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. Portugal claimed its empire to the east, which included Brazil. Okay. So specifically, the Portuguese had Brazil. As in the Spanish Empire, the Native Americans who lived in Brazil, specifically the Tupian Indians, had been largely wiped out by disease, unfortunately. Again, the Portuguese were not really any nicer or any different than the Spanish when it came to colonizing. The 1530s, Portugal began to issue grants of land and share properties with the crown. Unlike the Spanish American colonies, Brazil didn't offer instant wealth. You couldn't go there and mine silver or gold. However, you have these early settlers that are cutting and exporting Brazil wood. The Portuguese named the colony after the wood, which was used to produce a valuable dye. So to dye like textiles or things like that. Soon they turned to plantation agriculture, raising cattle, And like the Spanish, the Portuguese forced Native Americans and Africans to clear land for plantations, and as many as 4 million Africans were sent to Brazil. In Spanish America, this new culture emerges in Brazil that blends European, Native American, and African elements, which is one of the other reasons why Brazil has such a unique culture compared to other nations in South America. Now, challenging Portugal and Spain. In the 1500s, the wealth of the Americas helped make Spain the most powerful country in Europe, with Portugal really not far behind. But the jealous English and the Dutch and the French were very upset. For example, the French king Francois I said, "I should like to see Adam's will," as in Adam, the very first man, where he divided the earth between Spain and Portugal. So they're basically saying, how come they get all of it? I want some. To get around the country's strict control over colonial trade, a lot of smugglers traded illegally with Portuguese and Spanish colonists. So these would be French, European, and Dutch smugglers that want to trade with, that want to get the gold and silver. In the Caribbean and elsewhere, the Dutch, English, and the French pirates preyed on treasure ships, and some pirates, called privateers, I think we've heard about these guys before. The privateers operated with the approval of European governments. So privateers are essentially legal pirates. They're pirates, but they have a piece of paper from a king or queen that says, I can do this legally, pretty much. Other European explorers continue to sail the coast of Americas, hunting for gold and other treasure, as well as they're still looking for a northwest passage to Asia. So instead of going all the way down under South America, they're trying to go up. What if you go north of Canada? Can you get to Asia that way? They're still wanting for easier trade with the Spice Islands. Okay? So that's the end of today's lesson. That's the gist of Spanish and Portuguese colonies in the Americas. Today, your Junopod ends with another primary source. We're going to be reading a lot of those this chapter, but this one is two different viewpoints on the treatment of the Native Americans. One is by Bartolomé de las Casas, which we heard about, who protests greatly against the way Native Americans are being treated. Another one, though, talks more about why the Native Americans should be treated the way they are. And so read that, see what you think of it, answer the questions, and you guys are doing great. This week we'll finish up this chapter, so next week we'll do review. You can anticipate having a test mid-next week, probably Wednesday or Thursday. Okay? So good luck, enjoy, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.